The morning sun had barely crested the Wyoming hills when Carter Dalton stood before 200 faces he thought he knew. The conference room at Silver Creek Ranch smelled like camping and leather and something else, something bitter that he would later recognize as betrayal. Through the tall windows behind him, he could see the land rolling out in waves of gold and green, 16,000 acres of prime grazing territory that had made fortunes for men who knew how to work it, or men who knew how to cut corners. Wade Cunningham sat at the head of the long oak table, his silver hair catching the light like a crown. At 58, Wade had the look of a man who had never missed a meal or a chance to remind others of his success. His hands were folded on the table, manicured nails gleaming, not a callus in sight. Those hands had not touched a branding iron in 20 years. Carter's own hands were different, rope-scarred, sun-darkened, the hands of a man who still believed that good work spoke louder than good words. He had been speaking for 10 minutes, explaining why he had refused to sign the shipment authorization for 500 head of cattle scheduled to go to market that morning. His voice was steady, but his pulse was not. He knew what was coming, had known since Wade's secretary had called him at 5 in the morning, her voice tight with something that might have been pity. Emergency shareholder meeting, 7 a.m., attendance mandatory. Now Carter stood before his so-called partners, men and women who had watched him work 80-hour weeks for 8 years, who had shaken his hand when he bought his 10% stake 3 years ago, who had smiled and called him the future of Silver Creek. They were not smiling now. The cattle in question, Carter explained, had been treated with a growth hormone that was not yet approved for use in Wyoming. The paperwork was clean, yes. The veterinary certificates looked legitimate. But Carter had been in the barns at 4 in the morning 2 weeks ago when the shipment arrived. He had seen the labels. He had asked questions. And when the answers did not come, he had done what his grandfather had taught him to do. He had followed his gut. His gut said the cattle were dirty. His gut said that selling them would make Silver Creek complicit in something that would eventually come back to haunt them. His gut said that no amount of money was worth compromising the one thing a rancher could not buy back once it was lost. Reputation. When Carter finished speaking, the room sat in silence. Outside, a meadowlark called. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The sounds of an honest operation, built on 140 years of hard work and straight dealing. Wade let the silence stretch. He was good at that, at making other people uncomfortable while he remained perfectly at ease. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. It was not a kind smile. That is exactly the problem, Carter. You think you know better than everyone else in this room. You think your gut is worth more than our bottom line. You think being right is more important than being profitable. Carter felt the words land like fists. Around the table, heads nodded, not all of them, but enough. With respect, Wade, I think being right and being profitable are not mutually exclusive. We have built Silver Creek on quality, on trust. If we ship contaminated cattle and word gets out, we lose everything we have spent a century building. Wade's smile widened. He had been waiting for this. Carter could see it in his eyes. You know what your problem is? You are too much like your grandfather. The room went very still. Carter felt his breath catch. No one talked about Sam Dalton. Not in Carter's presence. Not if they valued their teeth. Sam Dalton was a dreamer, a romantic, a man who thought that doing things the right way was worth dying broke for. And you know what? He did die broke. He lost his ranch, lost his land, lost everything he had spent 50 years building, all because he was too honest for his own good. Wade stood now, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate care. He moved around the table like a lawyer approaching a jury, and in a way, that was exactly what he was doing. Your grandfather trusted the wrong people. He made handshake deals when he should have demanded contracts. He believed that hard work and integrity would win out over smart business and strategic planning. He was wrong. And 30 years later, his grandson is standing in my ranch, telling me that he knows better than I do how to run a cattle operation. Carter's hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to defend Sam, to tell these people that his grandfather had been worth 10 of any man in this room. But Wade was not finished. 3 years ago, I gave you a chance that no one else would have given you. Your father could not hold a job. Your family name was dirt in this industry, but I saw potential in you. I offered you a partnership. I let you buy into this operation with money you barely had, money you had to beg a bank to loan you. And how do you repay me? Wade's voice rose, filling the room. By second-guessing my decisions, by undermining my authority, By standing up in front of our shareholders and accusing me of running a dirty operation. I never said that. Carter's voice was quiet, but it cut through Wade's thunder. I said the cattle were treated with an unapproved hormone. I said we should not ship them until we verify the source. That is not an accusation. That is due diligence. Is it? Wade reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. He placed it on the table and slid it toward the nearest shareholder, a woman named Patricia who owned 8% and had never once visited the ranch. Because I have been doing some due diligence of my own. About you, Carter. About where your loyalties really lie. Carter's stomach dropped. He knew before the folder was even open that whatever was inside would be bad. Wade did not make moves like this unless he was certain of the kill. Patricia opened the folder. Her face changed. She looked at Carter, then quickly away, and passed the folder to the man beside her. Around the table it went, each shareholder reading, each face growing harder. When it reached the seat beside Wade, he took it back and held it up. Bank statements, receipts, equipment purchases made in your name, $50,000 of ranch money spent on personal investments. Carter felt the floor tilt beneath him. That is not personal. That equipment was for the ranch. You approved those purchases. Oh, I approved purchases for the ranch. But according to these receipts, the equipment was delivered to your personal address. And according to this contract you signed with the bank, you used your shares in Silver Creek as collateral for a personal loan. Wade walked closer now until he was standing directly in front of Carter. Close enough that Carter could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. You bought equipment with ranch money, had it delivered to your house, and used your partnership stake to secure financing for God knows what. And then you have the nerve to stand here and question my ethics? It was masterful. Carter could see that now. Wade had taken the truth and twisted it just enough to make it look like something else entirely. Yes, Carter had used his shares as collateral. Yes, he had purchased equipment. Yes, the invoices showed his home address because the ranch office had been under renovation and the vendor needed a delivery point. But Wade had stripped away the context. He had kept the emails where he had approved the purchases. He had deleted the messages explaining the delivery address. He had built a case that looked damning on paper, and he had presented it to people who did not know Carter well enough to question it. Patricia spoke first. Her voice was thin, disappointed. I move that we vote to remove Carter Dalton from his partnership position, effective immediately. The second came before Carter could draw a breath. The vote was called. Hands rose around the table. Carter counted them. 18 for removal, 2 against. The 2 ranch hands who had worked beside him in the barns, who knew the truth, who lacked the shares to make a difference. The motion passes. Wade's voice was formal now, businesslike. Carter Dalton, you are hereby removed from your partnership in Silver Creek Ranch. You are terminated from employment, effective immediately. Furthermore, this body demands repayment of the $50,000 in misappropriated funds within 90 days. Failure to repay will result in legal action. Carter stood very still. He thought about arguing. He thought about fighting. He thought about telling them all to go to hell. But his grandfather's voice was in his head, quiet and steady. Never let them see you break, boy. Never give them the satisfaction. So Carter nodded once. He looked at Wade, at the triumph barely concealed behind those cold eyes, and he said the only thing worth saying. You will regret this. Wade smiled. I doubt that very much. Carter turned and walked out of the conference room. He walked past the secretary who would not meet his eyes. He walked past the trophy case filled with ribbons and awards from 100 years of honest ranching. He walked out into the Wyoming morning, where the sun was higher now and the day was getting warm. His truck was parked where he had left it, covered in dust from yesterday's work. He climbed in and sat behind the wheel, and for a long moment he just breathed. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. Somewhere deep inside, something was breaking that he was not sure could be fixed. He had lost his job. He had lost his partnership. He had lost $50,000 he did not have. And worse than all of that, he had lost his belief in the idea that doing right mattered. His grandfather had died believing it. His father had abandoned it. And now Carter was sitting in a truck, unemployed and accused of theft, wondering which of them had been the fool. The drive back to his small rented house took 20 minutes. Carter did not remember any of it. He parked in the gravel driveway and sat staring at the peeling paint on the front door, at the mailbox hanging crooked on its post, at the life he had built that suddenly seemed very small and very fragile. Inside, the house was exactly as he had left it. Coffee cup in the sink, bills stacked on the kitchen table, the silence of a man who lived alone and had gotten used to it. Carter sat at the table and pulled out his phone. He needed to call someone. His father, maybe, though that conversation would be painful in ways he was not ready for. A lawyer, though he could not afford one. A friend, if he still had any after this. Instead, he just sat and waited. For what, he was not sure. Some sign, some answer, some indication that this was not the end of everything. The knock came 4 days later. 4 days of sitting in that kitchen, watching the shadows move across the walls. 4 days of not answering his phone when former coworkers called to offer condolences that felt like curiosity. 4 days of calculating and recalculating numbers that did not add up, trying to figure out how to find $50,000 in 90 days when no one in the ranching community would hire him now. Wade had made sure of that. Carter had heard through the grapevine that calls had been made, warnings issued. The message was clear. Anyone who hired Carter Dalton was making an enemy of Wade Cunningham, and no one wanted that. The knock was firm, professional. Carter opened the door to find a woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a suit that looked expensive but not showy. She carried a leather messenger bag and had the alert, careful eyes of someone who was used to delivering bad news. Carter Dalton, that's me. My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates in Billings, Montana. I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I have been trying to reach you for several weeks. Your phone appears to be disconnected. Carter realized he had not paid his phone bill. Had not paid much of anything, actually. He had been too busy sitting in the dark, replaying the last 8 years of his life and trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. What can I do for you, Miss Chen? Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out a large manila envelope, the kind that held legal documents, the kind that changed lives. I am here regarding the estate of Samuel Dalton. I believe he was your grandfather. The world tilted. Carter gripped the doorframe. My grandfather died 6 months ago. Yes, I am very sorry for your loss. The probate process has taken some time, which is why we are only now able to contact you. May I come in? Carter stepped aside. Rebecca entered the small house and looked around with the quick, assessing gaze of someone used to evaluating situations rapidly. If she judged him for the dishes in the sink or the bills on the table, she did not show it. They sat. Rebecca opened the envelope and pulled out documents that looked official and complicated. She laid them on the table between them like cards in a high-stakes game. Your grandfather left a will. It is quite detailed and, I should say, unusual. You are named as the sole beneficiary of his estate. Carter's throat was dry. I did not know he had an estate. I thought he lost everything. He did lose a great deal in 1985. But he spent the last 30 years of his life rebuilding. The estate includes the Broken Wheel Ranch in Montana, 14,000 acres of grazing land, 900 head of Black Angus cattle, ranch house, barns, equipment, and associated assets. Carter stared at her. This had to be a joke, some kind of mistake. Sam Dalton had died broke. Everyone knew that. His father had told him the story 100 times, always with the same bitter edge. Sam the dreamer. Sam the fool. Sam who died with nothing but regrets. There must be some mistake. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. I assure you there is no mistake. Your grandfather was very specific in his instructions. The ranch is yours, Carter, if you want it. The words hung in the air. If you want it, as though wanting had anything to do with it, as though a man who had just lost everything could afford to turn down a second chance, no matter how impossible it seemed. What is the catch? Rebecca smiled, and for the first time, Carter saw something like sympathy in her eyes. The catch is that the ranch is not free and clear. There are debts, significant debts. Your grandfather took out loans to buy back the land that was sold in the 80s. Those loans are still outstanding. $3.2 million to be precise, owed to First Montana Bank. Carter felt the hope that had started to rise in his chest shrivel and die. So you are telling me I am inheriting $3 million in debt. I am telling you that you are inheriting a working ranch with assets that far exceed its debts, provided you can keep it operational. The terms of the will are very clear. You must take possession of the ranch and operate it for 24 consecutive months. During that time, you must generate sufficient revenue to make the loan payments. If you succeed, the ranch is yours, free and clear. If you fail or if you abandon the property, It reverts to the bank. 24 months, 730 days to save a ranch he had never seen, to pay off a debt he had not incurred, to prove something to a dead man he had barely known. Why me? Carter heard himself ask. I barely knew him. We saw each other maybe twice in my whole life. Rebecca pulled out another document, this one handwritten on paper that looked old and creased from being folded and refolded many times. She handed it to Carter. He wanted you to have this. Carter unfolded the letter. His grandfather's handwriting was shaky but legible, the script of a man whose hands had spent more time holding reins than pens. Carter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are standing at the same crossroads I stood at when I was your age. I know your father told you I died a failure. In some ways, he is right. I lost the ranch once. I lost your grandmother. I lost the respect of my son, your father, and that is a wound that never healed. But I did not lose everything. I kept my word. I paid my debts. I worked every day of my life to fix the mistakes I made when I was young and stupid and too trusting. And in the end, I got most of it back. Not all, but most. I am leaving you this ranch because your father will not take it. He hates this life, hates what it cost our family. But I have heard things about you, boy. I have heard you are working cattle in Wyoming. I have heard you are good at it. I have heard you are honest, even when it costs you. That last part is what matters. This world does not have much use for honest men anymore. It chews them up and spits them out. I know. I was one of them. But I also know this. An honest man who refuses to quit cannot be beaten. He can be delayed. He can be knocked down. But he cannot be beaten. The ranch is not a gift. It is a test. Prove that an honest man can win, Carter. Prove it to yourself. Prove it to your father. Prove it to me, wherever I am now. Do not let history repeat. The letter was signed simply, Sam. Carter read it 3 times. Each time the words hit harder. His grandfather had known. Known about the betrayal, known about the loss, known about the doubt that was eating Carter alive right now. And somehow, across 30 years and 1,000 miles in the unbridgeable gulf of death, Sam Dalton was offering his grandson the one thing he needed most. A second chance. Carter looked up at Rebecca Chen. When can I see it? We can leave tomorrow morning if you like. The ranch is about 14 hours from here. I have taken the liberty of arranging accommodation in Billings for tomorrow night. We can drive out to the property the following day. Carter nodded slowly. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning. 14,000 acres, 900 head, 3.2 million in debt, 24 months. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. No one could turn around a ranch that size, that fast, with that much debt hanging over it. Especially not a man who had just been fired and accused of embezzlement. A man whose name was mud in the ranching community. A man with $800 in his checking account and no prospects. But then, his grandfather had done impossible things. Sam Dalton had lost everything in '85 and spent 3 decades clawing it back, acre by acre, payment by payment. If Sam could do it, maybe Carter could too. Or maybe he would fail, just like his grandfather had failed, and prove his father right about everything. Either way, sitting in this kitchen for another day was not an option. I will be ready at 6 a.m., Carter said. Rebecca stood and gathered her papers. She handed Carter her business card and a thick folder of documents about the ranch. Financial statements, property surveys, loan agreements, homework for the 14-hour drive north. At the door, she paused. Your grandfather spoke very highly of you in his will. He seemed to believe you were capable of something special. I hope he was right. After she left, Carter sat alone in the gathering darkness. He did not turn on the lights. He just sat there, holding his grandfather's letter, reading it over and over until he had memorized every word. Prove that an honest man can win. Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. The sound of things moving on, leaving the past behind. Carter folded the letter carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket over his heart. Then he stood and began to pack. He did not have much. A duffel bag of clothes, his grandfather's saddle, the one thing his father had kept from the estate sale, a toolkit, a photograph of his grandmother that he had never met, standing beside a young Sam Dalton in front of a ranch that no longer existed. Or maybe it did exist. Maybe it had been waiting all this time for someone to come back and finish what Sam had started. Carter loaded his truck in the darkness. He did not sleep that night. He sat on the front steps of the rental house and watched the stars wheel overhead, the same stars his grandfather must have watched from Montana, the same stars that had looked down on generations of ranchers who had bet everything on land and cattle and the belief that hard work meant something. At 5:45 a.m., headlights turned into his driveway. Rebecca Chen stepped out of a sensible sedan, looking exactly as put together as she had the day before. Ready? Carter threw his duffel into the truck bed and climbed behind the wheel. Follow me. The drive north was long and mostly silent. Carter's mind was too full for conversation. He thought about Wade Cunningham, probably sitting in the Silver Creek office right now, congratulating himself on removing a threat to his empire. He thought about his father, who would hear about this soon and would have opinions, none of them good. He thought about the $50,000 he still owed and the $3.2 million he was about to take on. But mostly he thought about his grandfather, about a man who had trusted the wrong people and paid for it with everything he owned, about a man who had spent 30 years rebuilding from nothing, about a man who had died alone, estranged from his only son, leaving everything to a grandson he barely knew. What had Sam Dalton seen in Carter that made him worthy of this inheritance? What had he hoped would happen? The landscape changed as they drove north. The rolling plains of Wyoming gave way to the mountains of Montana, peaks still capped with snow even though it was late spring. The sky seemed bigger here, more open, the kind of sky that made a man feel small and significant all at once. They stopped for gas and bad coffee in a town so small it did not have a traffic light. Rebecca made phone calls while Carter filled the tank. He could hear her through the open window, talking to someone about property surveys and loan extensions and title insurance. The language of law and land, transactions that turned dirt and grass into assets and liabilities. Back on the road, the mountains grew closer. The highway wound through valleys where rivers ran fast with snowmelt. Carter saw ranches from the road, spread out across the landscape like kingdoms. Cattle dotted the hillsides. Horses stood in paddocks. Barns and houses, some pristine and others falling apart, marked the presence of families who had been here for generations. His family had been here once. The Daltons. Before the fall, before the betrayal, before Sam had trusted the wrong man and lost it all. Carter's hands tightened on the steering wheel. History would not repeat. He would make sure of it. They reached Billings as the sun was setting, painting the sky in the shades of orange and purple that seemed too vivid to be real. Rebecca had reserved rooms at a modest hotel near the historic district. They agreed to meet for breakfast at 6 and set out for the ranch at 7. Carter lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a city he did not know. Tomorrow he would see the Broken Wheel Ranch. Tomorrow he would understand what his grandfather had left him. Tomorrow his life would change in ways he could not yet predict. He pulled out the letter and read it one more time. Do not let history repeat. Carter folded the letter and turned out the light. In the darkness, he made a promise to a man he had barely known. I won't, he whispered. I promise you, Granddad, I won't. The morning air in Montana tasted different, cleaner somehow, colder. Carter stood outside the hotel at 6:30, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb over the Beartooth Mountains. The peaks were still white with snow that would not melt until July, and the light hitting them was the color of old gold. This was big country, the kind of country that made a man remember how small he really was. Rebecca emerged from the hotel lobby carrying a thermos and a folder thick with documents. She had traded her suit for jeans and boots, though they looked new enough to still have the store crease. A lawyer trying to fit into ranch country. Carter appreciated the effort. It is about 2 hours from here, she said, climbing into her sedan. The roads get rough the last 20 miles. Your truck will handle it better than my car. Carter nodded. He had already decided to lead. Something about following felt wrong, like admitting he did not know where he was going, which was true, but still. They drove west out of Billings, leaving the city behind within minutes. The highway cut through land that seemed to go on forever, rolling hills covered in spring grass so green it almost hurt to look at. Cattle grazed in the distance, black dots against the endless backdrop. Here and there, ranch houses sat far back from the road, connected by long driveways that were more like private roads. These were working ranches, the real thing. Not the hobby operations that rich people bought to feel authentic. These were families who had been here for generations, who measured success in seasons survived rather than dollars earned. Carter had read the documents Rebecca gave him last night, sitting in the hotel room until 2 in the morning. The numbers were staggering. 14,000 acres was larger than he had imagined. 900 head of cattle represented more livestock than he had ever managed at once. The equipment inventory alone ran to 6 pages. And the debt, $3.2 million at 8.5% interest. Monthly payments of $140,000 for the next 24 months. It was impossible. No ranch generated that kind of cash flow unless it was running at peak efficiency with premium contracts and zero setbacks. And from what Carter could tell from the financial statements, Broken Wheel had been barely breaking even for the last 2 years. Sam had been paying the minimums, keeping the bank at bay, but not actually reducing the principal, which meant Carter was not just inheriting a ranch, he was inheriting a time bomb. The highway narrowed to 2 lanes, then wound into the mountains. Pine forest crowded close to the road. Streams rushed beneath bridges, swollen with runoff. They passed through a town that consisted of a gas station, a diner, and a post office. A sign proclaimed population 473. Carter wondered if that number included dogs. Rebecca's sedan followed gamely behind, though Carter could see her slowing on the curves. City car on country roads. He remembered his first time driving in the mountains, how different it felt from the flat plains of Wyoming. Here you had to respect the land or it would kill you. There was no margin for error. The turnoff came without warning. A wooden sign, weathered gray by decades of sun and snow, read Broken Wheel Ranch in letters that had been carved by hand and painted black. The paint was flaking. The sign tilted slightly to the left. Carter stopped his truck and stared at it. This was real. This was actually happening. He turned onto the dirt road. Gravel crunched under his tires. The road climbed through a stand of ponderosa pines, then broke into open country. And there, spread out before him like a promise or a warning, was the Broken Wheel Ranch. The main house sat on a rise about a quarter mile from the road. It was a log structure, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and stone chimneys at each end. The logs were dark with age and weather, but the structure looked sound, solid, built to last by men who knew their work. Behind the house, a massive red barn dominated the landscape. The paint was faded but intact. Beside it stood equipment sheds, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a workshop. Everything was laid out with the kind of logic that came from experience. Water sources centrally located, sheltered areas for the stock, clear sight lines from the house to every part of the operation. Carter's grandfather had built this, or rebuilt it anyway, had stood on this same rise and planned it all out, had driven every fence post and hung every gate and walked these fields in every season for 30 years. And now it was Carter's, if he could keep it. He parked near the house. Rebecca pulled in beside him. They sat for a moment in their respective vehicles, and Carter wondered if she was thinking the same thing he was, that this was too much, too big, too broken. But when they stepped out, the air hit him again. Clean, cold, real. And underneath it, the smell of livestock and hay and earth. The smell of a working ranch, the smell of home. The front door opened before they reached it. The man who stepped onto the porch was old. Not just old, but weathered in a way that suggested he had been old for a very long time and intended to stay that way indefinitely. He was maybe 5'8", lean as a fence post, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same leather as his boots. His eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky, and they fixed on Carter with an intensity that was almost physical. "You must be Sam's grandson." Carter nodded. "Carter Dalton." The old man descended the porch steps with the careful deliberation of someone whose knees had given him trouble for years, but who refused to acknowledge it. He extended a hand. "Frank Torres. Been foreman here for 40 years. Longer if you count the time before Sam lost the place." Carter shook his hand. The grip was strong, the skin rough with decades of rope work. 40 years is a long time. Frank nodded toward the mountains. "This land gets in your blood. Once it does, leaving feels like dying." Rebecca introduced herself and explained the legal situation. Frank listened without expression, though Carter noticed his jaw tighten when she mentioned the debt amount. "That sounds about right," Frank said. "Sam spent every dollar he made buying back what he lost. Never did get it all. Died trying, though." "Can I see the operation?" Carter asked. Frank studied him for a long moment, those winter sky eyes seeming to measure something deeper than appearance. "Your grandfather asked me to stay on until you got here. Said to show you everything, the good and the bad, especially the bad." They walked the property for 4 hours. Frank moved slowly but steadily, pointing out every detail with the precision of a man who had memorized every inch of 14,000 acres. The main herd was scattered across 3 pastures, rotated every 2 weeks to prevent overgrazing. The cattle were Black Angus, good bloodlines, but they looked thin. Not starving, but not thriving either. Feed costs, Frank explained. Drought last summer meant we had to buy hay instead of growing it. Ate up the profit margin. They examined the equipment. 2 tractors, one from the 80s that ran like a watch, one from the 90s that burned oil and needed a new transmission. 3 ATVs for checking fence lines. A truck for hauling feed, all of it functional but aging. All of it one breakdown away from being junk. The barns were solid, at least. Sam had rebuilt them himself after buying back the property, using timber milled from trees on the land. The wood was good, the construction was better than good, but the roofs needed work and the water systems were outdated. "How many hands do you have?" Carter asked. "Right now? Just me. Sam let the crew go last fall when money got tight. Been running it myself since then." Carter stopped walking. "You have been managing 14,000 acres and 900 head of cattle by yourself?" Frank shrugged. "It is not as hard as it sounds if you know what you are doing and do not mind working every hour God sends. But I am 68 years old, Carter. I cannot do this much longer." That is the truth. They stood at the edge of the north pasture, looking out over the land that rolled away toward the mountains. A creek ran through the middle distance, lined with cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out. In another month, this would all be green and gold. Beautiful country, hard country. "Why did you stay?" Carter asked. "After Sam died, you could have walked away." Frank was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Because he asked me to. Last conversation we had, he was sitting in that house, knew he did not have much time left. He said, 'Frank, my grandson is going to need help. He is going to need someone who knows this land. Will you stay until he gets here?' And you said yes." I said yes. Frank turned to look at Carter directly. "But I need to know something before we go any further. Are you here to save this place, or are you here to sell it?" The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Carter thought about the easy answer, the smart answer. Sell the ranch, pay off the debt, walk away with whatever was left over. Start fresh somewhere else. Forget about legacy and duty and dead men's dreams. But that was not why he had driven 14 hours north. That was not why he was standing here in the Montana wind, looking at land his grandfather had died trying to save. "I am here to save it." Frank nodded slowly. "Then we had better get to work." That night, Carter sat in the ranch house kitchen, surrounded by 30 years of financial records. Frank had gone to the bunkhouse after showing him where everything was kept. Rebecca had driven back to Billings to file paperwork, promising to return in a week to check on progress. Carter was alone in the house his grandfather had died in, trying to understand how the man had survived as long as he did. The records told a story that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. 1985 had been the disaster year. Sam had taken out a loan to expand the operation, trusting a banker named Martin Price who had promised favorable terms. But when the time came to finalize the deal, Price had backed out, claiming market conditions had changed. Without the expansion capital, Sam could not meet his existing obligations. The bank foreclosed. Sam lost everything. Everything except his determination. The record showed him buying back the first parcel of land in 1987, 400 acres. He had paid Kim money he must have saved working other jobs. Then another parcel in 89. Then another. Piece by piece, year by year, Sam Dalton had rebuilt his ranch from nothing. But the cost had been enormous. There were hospital bills for his wife, marked paid in installments that stretched over years. There was a notation in 92 in Sam's handwriting. "Catherine passed today." Sold the truck to pay for the funeral. There were gaps in the records where Carter could see his grandfather had simply run out of money and had to stop buying land until he could save more. And through it all, there were letters, dozens of them. Letters to the bank asking for extensions. Letters to cattle buyers, negotiating prices. Letters to equipment dealers, explaining why he was late on payments, but promising he was good for the money. Every letter ended the same way. "You have my word." Carter found himself reading one letter over and over. It was dated 2010, written to Martin Price at First Montana Bank. "Martin, I know we have had our differences over the years. I know you think I am a fool for trying to rebuild what I lost. Maybe you are right, but I gave my word to my wife that I would get our land back. I gave my word to my son, though he will not speak to me anymore. and I am giving my word to you now. I will pay every dollar I owe. It might take me the rest of my life, but I will pay it." The signature was shaky. Sam's hands had already been failing him by then. Carter set down the letter and rubbed his eyes. It was past midnight. He should sleep. Tomorrow would be a long day, the first of 730 long days if he was going to make this work. But sleep felt impossible. His mind was racing, calculating numbers that did not add up. 140,000 a month, 12 months. $1.68 million just in the first year. The ranch was currently generating maybe 50,000 a month. He needed to triple that, no, more than triple it, because he also needed money for operations, repairs, feed, labor. It could not be done. There was no scenario in which the numbers worked. Unless Carter sat up straight. He pulled out the geological survey he had noticed earlier in the stack. It was dated 2018, commissioned by some mining company he had never heard of. The survey showed the Broken Wheel Ranch and the surrounding properties. And there, marked in yellow highlighter by someone, were two words: potential lithium deposit. Carter stared at the map. Lithium, the stuff they used in batteries for electric cars, phones, computers. The stuff that was worth a fortune right now because every car company in the world was racing to go electric. If there was lithium on this land, Carter could lease the mineral rights. Could probably get $500,000 a year, maybe more. Enough to pay the bank and save the ranch without breaking his back trying to triple the cattle revenue. It would be so easy. One signature, one contract, financial security. But even as he thought it, he knew what his grandfather would have said. Mining tore up the land, changed it forever, left scars that would still be visible 100 years from now. Sam had spent 3 decades healing this ranch, bringing it back to life. Would he want his grandson to tear it apart for money? Carter remembered Frank's words. Your grandfather hated mining, said it tears up the land for generations. He set the survey aside and pulled out his phone. He needed to talk to someone, needed advice from a person who understood both the ranching life and the business realities of keeping an operation afloat. There was only one person who fit that description, and calling her was going to be complicated. Beth Cunningham answered on the third ring. Her voice was cautious. Carter? Hey, Beth? Silence. Then I heard what happened. With my father. I am so sorry. Carter leaned back in the chair. It is what it is. No, it is not. It is wrong. I have been trying to find a way to tell you. My father, he has been different lately. Harder. I think he is scared of something. Scared of losing control, maybe. Beth was quiet for a moment. Where are you? You sound far away. Montana. I inherited my grandfather's ranch. The Sam Dalton Ranch? I heard that place was gone. It was. He spent 30 years getting it back. Now it is mine, if I can keep it. And that is why you are calling. You need advice. Carter smiled despite himself. Beth had always been able to read him. I need a veterinarian who makes ranch calls. And maybe a friend who understands this life. I might know someone who fits both descriptions. They talked for an hour. Carter explained the situation, the debt, the timeline, the impossible math. Beth listened without interrupting, and he could hear her mind working through the problems the way she always did. Methodical, thorough, honest. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You cannot do this the conventional way, she finally said. Running a traditional cattle operation, even perfectly, will not generate that kind of revenue. You need to think differently. Like what? Direct sales. Cut out the middlemen. Build a brand that people will pay premium prices for. Market to restaurants, high-end grocers, people who care about where their food comes from and how it was raised. That takes time. Marketing, relationships, building trust. Then you had better start tomorrow. There was something else in her voice now. Something Carter could not quite identify. Beth, why are you helping me? Your father made it pretty clear that anyone who sides with me is making an enemy of him. Maybe I am tired of my father deciding who my enemies are. After they hung up, Carter sat in the darkness of his grandfather's kitchen and felt something shift inside him. A plan was forming. It was risky. It was ambitious. It might be impossible, but it was better than giving up. He would not lease the mineral rights. He would not take the easy way out. He would do this the way Sam had taught him, even though they had barely known each other. The right way, the hard way, the honest way. And if he failed, at least he would fail trying. The next morning, Carter was up before dawn. He found Frank in the barn, already feeding the horses. I need to hire hands, Carter said. Good ones. People who know cattle and are not afraid of work. Frank looked up from the hay bale he was breaking apart. You got money to pay them? Not yet, but I will. I am going to turn this operation around, Frank. I am going to make it profitable, and I am going to need help doing it. Frank studied him with those winter sky eyes. Then he nodded. I know some boys, good workers, lost their jobs when other ranches went under. They will work for fair wages and a chance to be part of something that matters. Hire them. Over the next week, Carter threw himself into learning every aspect of the Broken Wheel Ranch. He rode the fence lines with Frank, checking for breaks and weak spots. He examined every head of cattle, noting which ones were thriving and which were struggling. He inventoried the equipment, made lists of what needed repair and what needed replacement. He talked to feed suppliers, veterinarians, cattle buyers. He asked questions until his head hurt and took notes until his hand cramped. And slowly, painfully, a picture emerged. The ranch was not failing because of bad luck or bad management. It was failing because it was stuck in the past. Sam had run it the way ranches were run in the 1950s. Honest, straightforward, but not strategic. He sold to whoever offered the best price that day. He did not negotiate long-term contracts. He did not market his beef as anything special. He just raised good cattle and hoped the market would reward him for it. But the market did not care about good. It cared about cheap and consistent. And Broken Wheel could not compete on either of those metrics. Carter needed to change the game entirely. He called Beth again. This time he had a proposal. I want you to come to Montana, be the ranch veterinarian, help me build something new. Carter, I have a practice here. Clients, a life. I know, but you told me once that you became a vet because you wanted to work with people who actually cared about animals, people who did not see them as just commodities. Is that still true? He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. What are you really asking me? I am asking if you want to be part of something that matters, something that proves doing things right can actually work. I am asking if you are willing to walk away from your father's world and help me build a different one. The silence stretched so long Carter thought she had hung up. Then, finally, when do you need me? Yesterday. She laughed. It was a sound Carter had not heard in too long. I will need 2 weeks to close out my practice and pack. But Carter, if I do this, it is not just about the work. It is about us figuring out what we are to each other after all these years. I know. And you are okay with that? I think I am more than okay with it. After they hung up, Carter walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. The land rolled away in every direction, 14,000 acres of possibility and responsibility. Somewhere out there, cattle were bedding down for the night. Somewhere, water was running through creeks that had been running for 10,000 years. Somewhere, the ghost of Sam Dalton was watching his grandson and wondering if he had made the right choice. Frank joined him on the porch, carrying 2 bottles of beer. Thought you might need this. Carter took the beer and drank. It was cold and bitter and perfect. You think I am crazy? Frank shrugged. Crazy is relative. Your grandfather was crazy, spent 30 years of his life paying for one mistake, trying to get back something most people would have just walked away from. But he did it, got most of it back anyway, died trying to get the rest. Do you think he was happy? Frank was quiet watching the sunset. I think he was satisfied, and for a man like Sam Dalton, that might have been better than happy. They stood in silence as the last light faded from the sky. Stars began to appear, more stars than Carter had ever seen. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. Frank, why did my grandfather really leave this place to me? The old man finished his beer before answering. He said you reminded him of himself, not the broken version he became, the version he was before everything went wrong. Young, idealistic, willing to fight for what was right even when it cost you. And you think he was right? Frank turned to look at Carter directly. I think you are standing here instead of selling out and walking away. So yeah, I think maybe he was. Later that night, lying in the bedroom that had been his grandfather's, Carter pulled out the letter one more time. He read it by the light of his phone, the words already familiar. Do not let history repeat. But maybe history did not have to repeat its equality. Maybe Carter could take the lesson without repeating the loss, could be idealistic and strategic, could do things the right way while also doing them the smart way. His grandfather had fought alone, had trusted the wrong people, had believed that good work was enough. Carter would not fight alone. He had Frank. He would have Beth. He would have the crew he was building. And he would not just trust, he would verify. would protect himself while staying true to his principles. He fell asleep with the letter on his chest and dreamed of a ranch that worked, of cattle thriving on green pastures, of a life built on honest work and fair dealing, of proving his grandfather right. In the morning, the real work would begin. The first month nearly killed him. Carter woke every morning at 4:30, before the sun thought about rising, before the cold had released its grip on the Montana night. He would stand at the kitchen window with coffee that tasted like regret and watch the darkness slowly give way to gray, then blue, then the pale gold of a new day he was not sure he deserved. By 5, he was in the barns. By 6, he was checking cattle. By 7, he was fixing whatever had broken overnight, because something always broke. Fence wire, water pumps, equipment that should have been replaced a decade ago but had been held together with hope and stubbornness because Sam Dalton did not have money for new. Frank worked beside him, saying little, but his presence was a kind of teaching. The way he moved through the morning routine, the way he checked a cow's health with just a glance, the way he could tell from 50 yards away if a fence post was rotting at the base. 40 years of knowledge freely given to a man who desperately needed it. The crew arrived at the second week. 3 men, all in their 30s, all hungry for work after the ranches they had worked for went under. Miguel, who had grown up on his family's ranch in New Mexico before they lost it to drought and debt. Kyle, who had worked cattle drives in Wyoming and could rope better than anyone Carter had ever seen. And Thomas, quiet and steady, who had been a Marine before coming home to find that the ranch life he remembered had vanished while he was overseas. They worked for wages Carter could barely afford, and they worked hard, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, no complaints. They understood what Carter was trying to do. They understood that this was about more than just one ranch. It was about proving that the old way could still work if you were willing to bleed for it. Beth arrived on a Tuesday morning, driving a truck packed with everything she owned and towing a trailer full of veterinary equipment. She parked in front of the ranch house and climbed out. And for a moment, Carter just stood there on the porch, remembering the girl she had been and seeing the woman she had become. 14 years could change a person, could add lines around the eyes and gray in the hair, and a weariness that came from working too hard for too long. But it could not change the essential thing. The core. Beth was still Beth. Still the girl who had cried when she saw a newborn calf take its first steps. Still the woman who believed that animals deserved better than they usually got. She looked up at him and smiled. It was tired and tentative and real. So, this is it. Carter came down the steps. This is it. They stood facing each other, and 1,000 conversations happened in the silence. About the years apart, about her father, about what this meant, her coming here, about whether they could build something new from the ruins of something that had ended before it really began. Finally, Beth reached out and took his hand. "Show me the herd. I want to see what we are working with." They walked the pastures together, Beth's trained eye cataloging every animal, every deficiency, every problem that needed solving. The cattle were thin but not dangerously so, undernourished but not sick. They had been neglected not out of cruelty but out of necessity. One man, even a man as capable as Frank, could only do so much. "This is fixable," Beth said as they stood watching a cow nursing her calf. "But it is going to take time and money. Better feed, mineral supplements, a strict health protocol, and you need to call the underperformers, sell off the cattle that are not earning their keep." Carter knew she was right, knew that running a profitable operation meant making hard decisions about which animals stayed and which went. But every head he sold was revenue he would not have later. It was a gamble. Cut losses now to be stronger later, or keep every animal and hope you could bring them all up to standard before time ran out. "How many would you call?" Beth walked among the cattle, pointing. That one, the older cow there, the heifer with the limp, maybe 50 head total. Sell them now while they still have some value. Use the money to improve the feed for the rest. In 6 months, you will have a herd worth twice as much per head. 50 head at current market rates would bring maybe $60,000. Enough to buy better feed for 3 months, maybe 4. Enough to make a dent, but not enough to solve the problem. Carter made the decision. Do it. Work with Miguel to identify which ones go. We will ship them next week. That night, he sat at the kitchen table running numbers that still did not add up. Revenue for the first month had been $48,000. He had spent $32,000 on operations, feed, wages for the new crew. That left $16,000 toward the $140,000 he owed the bank each month. He was $124,000 short, and that was after cutting every expense to the bone. His phone rang. The number was unfamiliar but local. Carter answered. "Mr. Dalton, this is Martin Price, First Montana Bank." Carter sat up straighter. He had been expecting this call but hoping it would not come so soon. "Mr. Price, I wanted to check in on how things are going out at Broken Wheel. See if you are settling in all right." The voice was smooth, professional, with an undertone of something that might have been amusement. Carter knew that voice, had heard it in other men. The voice of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "We are managing." "I am glad to hear it. I was reviewing your loan file today, and I noticed your first payment is due in 3 weeks. Just wanted to make sure you were aware and prepared." "I am aware." "Good, good. You know your grandfather and I had a complicated relationship, but I always respected his determination. He was a fighter. I hope you have that same quality, Mr. Dalton. You are going to need it." The line went dead. Carter sat holding the phone, feeling the weight of those words. Martin Price, the man who had pulled the loan that destroyed Sam Dalton in 1985. The man who now held Carter's fate in his hands. The man who, Carter was beginning to suspect, had been planning this for a very long time. Beth found him an hour later, still sitting in the dark. "You are going to wear yourself out if you keep this up." Carter showed her the numbers. She read them without speaking, her face growing more serious with each line. "You need to change the model," she said finally. "You cannot win by doing what everyone else is doing, just trying to do it better. You need to do something completely different." "Like what?" Beth pulled out her phone and opened a browser. She showed him websites for high-end steakhouses in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco. Restaurants that advertise grass-fed, sustainably raised, ethically sourced beef. Restaurants that charge $40 for a steak and had waiting lists for reservations. These places pay premium prices for premium beef, but they need a story. They need to know where the meat comes from, how it was raised, who raised it. They need to be able to tell their customers that this beef came from a ranch that does things right. Carter looked at the prices. Some of these places were paying 3 times the commodity rate. Why would they buy from us? We have no reputation, no track record. Because I can give you credibility. I can certify that your cattle are raised to the highest standards. I can document everything. Health records, grazing practices, feed quality. I can make you the kind of supplier these restaurants are looking for. And you think they will care? I think they will if we tell the story right. Your grandfather spent 30 years rebuilding this ranch from nothing. Paid back every dollar he owed. Died trying to finish what he started. That is a story worth telling. Carter felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the knot that had been there since the day Wade Cunningham fired him. Beth was right. He had been thinking too small, trying to beat the commodity market at its own game. But he did not have to play that game. He could create a different game entirely. "We need a brand," he said. "A name that means something." "What about Broken Wheel?" Carter shook his head. "That sounds like something that does not work anymore. We need something that tells people what we stand for." They sat in silence, thinking. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. "Honest beef," Beth said suddenly. "Simple, direct. It is what you are, what your grandfather was." Carter turned the words over in his mind. Honest beef, raised right, sold fair, from a ranch that kept its promises. "I like it." They spent the next week building a website. Beth took photographs of the ranch, the cattle, the mountains. She wrote the story of Sam Dalton and Broken Wheel Ranch, making it come alive in words that would make city people understand why they should care about where their food came from. Miguel, who turned out to have unexpected skills with design, created a logo. A simple wheel unbroken with the words "honest beef" in clean letters. Carter wrote emails to 50 restaurants in 5 states. He explained what they were doing. He included Beth's certification. He offered samples. He expected maybe 3 or 4 responses. He got 22. 22 restaurants interested in hearing more. Interested in the story. Interested in beef from a ranch that did things differently. The first order came from a restaurant in Seattle called The Honest Table. They wanted to try 100 pounds of steaks. If they liked the quality, they would commit to a monthly order of 500 pounds. Carter read the email 3 times to make sure he understood. 500 pounds a month at premium prices. That was $12,000 in revenue from one customer. If he could get 10 customers like that, he would be close to breaking even. He showed Frank, who read the email and smiled for the first time since Carter had arrived. Your grandfather would have loved this. He always said the problem with ranching was that the people eating the beef never met the people raising it. You are fixing that. The samples shipped on a Monday. Carter used the best cuts from the cattle he had culled, dry aged for 3 weeks in a cooler he had to borrow from a neighbor. He packed them in ice and shipped them overnight, spending money he did not have on shipping fees because this had to be perfect. The response came on Wednesday. The chef at the Honest Table called Carter directly. This is the best beef I have tasted in 5 years. When can you start shipping regular orders? 2 weeks, Carter said, hoping it was true. The chef laughed. I will take it. And Mr. Dalton, tell me more about your grandfather. I want to put his story on our menu, Carter told him. Told him about Sam losing everything and spending 3 decades getting it back. Told him about the ranch being kept alive by one old man's stubborn refusal to quit. Told him about the promise to rebuild what had been broken. When he finished, the chef was quiet for a moment. That is the kind of story our customers need to hear. That is the kind of story that makes food mean something more than just calories. Thank you for sharing it. After he hung up, Carter sat in his grandfather's office and felt tears sting his eyes. He had thought Sam's story was a tragedy, a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people and paying for it with everything. But maybe it was not a tragedy. Maybe it was an inspiration, a story about refusing to stay down, about fighting back even when fighting seemed pointless. Maybe his grandfather had not died a failure. Maybe he had died a teacher, leaving lessons behind for anyone willing to learn them. The orders kept coming. By the end of the month, Carter had commitments from 18 restaurants in 4 states. Total monthly revenue, if he could deliver, $94,000. Still short of the 140 he needed, but closer. So much closer. But delivering was the problem. He needed USDA-certified processing facilities. He needed refrigerated transport. He needed consistency in quality and timing. He needed systems that did not exist yet. Frank had a solution. There is a processing plant in Butte, family-owned. They do custom work for small ranchers. Quality is good, prices are fair. I can make an introduction. Prices are tone. They drove to Butte on a Saturday, 3 hours each way. The processing plant was clean and professional, run by a woman named Sarah Morrison who had learned the business from her father. She listened to Carter's plan and nodded. I can handle your volume, but you need to commit to a schedule. I need to know when cattle are coming and how many. I cannot just fit you in whenever you feel like it. Carter agreed to a monthly delivery schedule, every 3rd Tuesday, consistent, reliable. The cost was higher than he wanted but fair. And Sarah Morrison had eyes that reminded him of Frank's, honest eyes. The eyes of someone who did good work and expected others to do the same. On the drive back, Frank was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at Carter, he said, You are doing it right. Building relationships. Keeping your word. Your grandfather would be proud. Carter felt the words settle somewhere deep. He thought about the life he had been living before this. Working for Wade Cunningham. Watching corners get cut. Watching integrity get traded for profit. He had hated it, but had not known how to fight it. Now he knew. You fought it by building something better, by proving that the right way could also be the successful way. The second month was better than the first. Revenue hit $78,000. Expenses dropped to $29,000 as systems became more efficient. That was $49,000 toward the payment, still $91,000 short, but the trajectory was right. They were heading in the right direction. Then Wade Cunningham called. Carter almost did not answer. The number came up on his phone, and for a moment, he just stared at it, wondering what fresh hell this was going to bring. Finally, he answered, Wade, heard you are trying to make a go of that old place. Figured I would call and see how the great experiment is going. Carter could hear the smirk in Wade's voice. The assumption that Carter was failing. The anticipation of being proven right. We are doing fine. Are you? Because I have been hearing things. Hearing you are trying to sell beef directly to restaurants. Cutting out the processors. Building some kind of boutique operation. News travels. It does. And you know what else I have been hearing? I have been hearing that some of those restaurants are asking questions about you, about your background, about that little embezzlement situation at Silver Creek. Carter felt his blood run cold. You know that was fabricated. Do I? Does anyone? All they know is what the records show. And the records show you were fired for misappropriating funds. That is going to be a hard thing to overcome when you are trying to build trust with high-end clients. What do you want, Wade? Wade's voice changed, became harder, less playful. I want you to understand something. You do not get to walk away from me and build something better. You do not get to prove that my way was wrong. I have been doing this for 30 years, boy. I have seen 100 idealists like you come and go. They all think they can change the game. They all think integrity matters more than results. And they all end up broke. Carter's hand tightened on the phone. Is that what you called to tell me? I called to make you an offer, a friendly offer. Sell me that ranch. I will give you $2 million cash, enough to pay off the bank and walk away with something in your pocket. You can start over somewhere else, somewhere my name does not reach. And if I say no, then you are going to find out how hard it is to build a business when people do not trust you. You are going to find out what happens when someone starts making calls, asking questions, planting doubts. You would sabotage me? I would remind people that you have a history, that you have been accused of theft, that maybe they should think twice before doing business with you. The line went dead. Carter sat holding the phone, feeling rage and fear war inside him. Wade was going to go after his reputation, was going to use the false embezzlement charge to destroy the trust he was building with restaurant clients. And there was nothing Carter could do to stop it because the accusation was out there, part of the public record, impossible to erase. He told Beth that night. She listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each sentence. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My father is scared." "Of what?" "Of you, of what you represent. You are proof that his way is not the only way, that cutting corners is not necessary, that integrity can win. He has spent his entire life believing that nice guys finish last, and you are proving him wrong. That terrifies him. So what do I do? You keep building. You keep doing it right. And when he makes his move, you be ready to prove that every word he says is a lie." "But how?" Beth stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. She was quiet for so long that Carter thought she was not going to answer. Then softly she said, "I have been keeping records of my father's operation, the corners he cuts, the rules he bends. I never knew what to do with them. But maybe it is time people knew the truth about Wade Cunningham." "Beth, that is your father." She turned to face him, and her eyes were wet but determined. "He stopped being my father when he became a bully, when he started hurting people to protect his ego. You are not the first person he has done this to, Carter. You are just the first person who refused to stay down." 3 days later, the first call came. A restaurant in Portland, apologizing but saying they needed to put their order on hold. They had received information that raised concerns about Broken Wheel Ranch's business practices. They wanted to verify some things before proceeding. Carter knew this was Wade's doing, knew it was just the beginning. He called the chef personally, explained the situation at Silver Creek, explained that he had been falsely accused, offered to provide documentation, references, anything they needed. The chef was sympathetic but firm. "I believe you, Mr. Dalton, but I have investors. I have a reputation to protect. Until this is cleared up, I cannot move forward." 2 more restaurants called the next day with similar concerns. Carter's carefully built network was crumbling before it had a chance to prove itself. Wade Cunningham was burning it down with whispers and innuendo, and there was nothing Carter could do to stop it. He sat in his truck at the edge of the north pasture, watching cattle graze, wondering if this was where it ended. If Wade had finally found the way to destroy him for good. His phone rang, an unknown number from Wyoming. Carter almost did not answer. The voice on the other end was female, older, uncertain. "Is this Carter Dalton?" "Yes, my name is Patricia Moore. I was a shareholder in Silver Creek Ranch. I was at the meeting when Mr. Cunningham, I do not know how to say this." "You can just say it, ma'am. I think I made a mistake. Voting to remove you. I have been going through my records and I found some emails. Emails that Mr. Cunningham sent before the meeting. He told us you were a problem, that you were trying to undermine his authority. He asked us to trust him to handle it." Carter's heart was pounding. "Do you still have those emails?" "I do, and there are others. Messages where he talks about needing to remove you before you cost him money, before you expose things he has been doing." "What things?" Patricia was quiet. Then in a rush, she said, "I think he has been using unapproved hormones in the cattle for years. I think he falsified records to make it look legitimate. And I think he knew that you knew, and that is why he had to get rid of you. Would you be willing to go on record with this?" Another pause, then, "Yes. Yes, I would. What he did to you was wrong. And if he has been lying about the cattle, people need to know. After he hung up, Carter sat very still. The pieces were falling into place. Wade's desperation, his need to destroy Carter's reputation. It was not just about ego, it was about survival. If Carter succeeded in building an ethical operation, it would highlight everything Wade was doing wrong, would make people ask questions. Wade Cunningham was not just scared, he was guilty. And now Carter had a witness willing to talk. He called Beth, told her about Patricia, asked if she was still willing to share what she knew. I am, but Carter, if we do this, there is no going back. My father will never forgive me. I know, and I would never ask you to do this if there was another way. There is not another way. He has to be stopped. Not just for you, for everyone he has hurt, everyone he will hurt if we let him keep going. They spent the next week gathering evidence. Patricia sent her emails. Beth provided documentation of Silver Creek's hormone use, certified by her veterinary credentials. Another ranch hand, one of the two who had voted against Carter's removal, came forward with records showing Wade had ordered him to falsify quality reports. The picture that emerged was damning. Wade Cunningham had been running a corrupt operation for years, hiding behind his reputation while systematically breaking the rules he claimed to uphold. Carter took everything to the FDA, filed a formal complaint, provided documentation, named witnesses. Then he waited. The call came on a Friday afternoon. An FDA inspector wanted to visit Broken Wheel Ranch, wanted to verify that Carter's operation was clean, wanted to see for himself the contrast between what Carter was building and what Wade had been running. The inspector spent 2 days at the ranch. He examined every animal, reviewed every record, talked to Beth about protocols and practices, talked to Frank about the history of the place and Sam Dalton's philosophy. At the end of the second day, he shook Carter's hand. This is how it should be done. This is what ranching is supposed to look like. I wish more operations ran like this. After he left, Carter stood on the porch with Frank and Beth and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The third month was ending. Revenue was up to $96,000, still short but closer, so much closer. And now finally the truth about Wade Cunningham was going to come out. Frank handed Carter a beer. To your grandfather, the stubborn old bastard who refused to quit. Carter raised his bottle. To Sam Dalton, who taught me that doing right is worth dying broke for. But who would be happy to know we might not have to die broke after all? They drank as the stars came out. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle were settling for the night. Somewhere the land was healing. Somewhere a ghost was smiling. The FDA moved faster than Carter expected. 3 weeks after filing his complaint, federal inspectors descended on Silver Creek Ranch in Wyoming with warrants and testing equipment. They arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning, a convoy of government vehicles rolling through the gates that Carter had once walked through every day. He heard about it from Miguel, who had a cousin still working there. The cousin said Wade Cunningham's face went white when he saw the badges. Carter did not celebrate. He sat on the porch of the Broken Wheel Ranch house, coffee growing cold in his hands, and felt nothing but a deep, weary sadness. This was not how he had wanted to win. He had wanted to succeed on his own merits, to build something so undeniably good that it spoke for itself. Instead, he had been forced to tear someone else down just to survive. Beth found him there as the sun was climbing over the eastern ridges. You are thinking about my father. Carter nodded. I did not want it to be like this. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither of them moved away. He made his choices. You made yours. That is all there is. He destroyed my reputation to protect his lies. I am just setting the record straight. I know, but it still hurts. Even when it is the right thing, it hurts. They sat in silence, watching the ranch come to life. Miguel was already moving cattle to fresh pasture. Kyle was repairing fence in the south section. Thomas was working on one of the tractors, the sound of metal on metal ringing across the morning. Good men doing honest work, the kind of operation Sam Dalton had dreamed of. The news broke 2 days later. Silver Creek Ranch under federal investigation for systematic violations of livestock medication regulations. The headlines were everywhere. Local papers, regional news, even some national coverage because Wade Cunningham had been such a prominent figure in the industry. Carter's phone started ringing immediately. The restaurants that had pulled their orders called back. They had seen the news. They understood now what had really happened. They wanted to restart their commitments. Some of them wanted to increase their orders. Within 48 hours, Carter's monthly revenue projections jumped from 96,000 to 132,000. Still 8,000 short of what he needed, but close enough that he could see the finish line. And then Martin Price called. The voice on the phone was different this time. Less smooth, less certain. There was an edge to it that Carter recognized. The sound of a man who had just realized his plans were not working out the way he had expected. Mr. Dalton, I think we need to meet. Discuss your loan situation. I am making my payments, Mr. Price. Are you? Because according to my calculations, you are still quite short of the monthly obligation. I will have the full payment by the deadline. Will you? That would be impressive. But even if you do, we need to discuss the broader terms of your loan. There are some concerns about the long-term viability of your operation. What concerns? I would prefer to discuss this in person. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the bank. The line went dead before Carter could respond. Frank was in the barn, mending tack with hands that had been doing the same work for longer than Carter had been alive. He looked up when Carter entered, read his face, and set down the leather he had been working on. Bank? Bank. They are going to try something. Martin Price does not call meetings unless he has an angle. That is what I figure. Frank stood slowly, working the stiffness out of his knees. You want me to come with you? Carter thought about it. Thought about walking into that office alone to face a man who had destroyed his grandfather. Thought about the intimidation, the pressure, the way powerful men use silence and space to make others feel small. Yeah, I would appreciate that. They drove to Billings the next morning, leaving before dawn. The route was familiar now, the highway winding through mountains that were beginning to show their summer colors. Green and gold, and the deep purple of distant ridges. Beautiful country, country worth fighting for. The bank was a monument to permanence. Stone and glass and brass fixtures that gleamed under lights that never flickered. The kind of building designed to make people feel that the institution was eternal, unchangeable, more solid than the ground it stood on. Martin Price's office was on the third floor overlooking the city. He was standing at the window when his secretary showed them in, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man surveying his domain. He turned when they entered. Late 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of man who had been powerful for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. Mr. Dalton and Mr. Torres, thank you for coming. He did not offer to shake hands, just gestured to the chairs in front of his desk and settled into his own seat like a king taking a throne. I will be direct. I have reviewed your loan file extensively over the past few weeks. Your operation is showing improvement. I will grant you that. But the fundamental economics remain challenging. You are still not meeting your monthly obligations consistently. I will make this month's payment, perhaps, but what about next month and the month after that? Mr. Dalton, I have been in this business for 40 years. I have seen dozens of operations like yours, young men with big dreams and small resources, convinced they can will a failing ranch back to profitability. Sometimes they succeed, usually they fail, and when they fail, everyone suffers. The ranch deteriorates. The land is mismanaged. The bank is left holding a devalued asset. Where is this going, Mr. Price? It is going toward a solution that benefits everyone. I have a buyer interested in the Broken Wheel Ranch. A development company. They are willing to pay $4.2 million. That would clear your debt entirely and leave you with $1 million to start fresh somewhere else. Carter felt Frank tense beside him, felt his own blood pressure rising, but he kept his voice level. The same development company that tried to buy from my grandfather? Martin's face did not change. I do not know what you are referring to. The mineral rights, the lithium deposit, that is what this has always been about, is not it? Now Martin Price smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Mr. Dalton, I have no idea what minerals may or may not be on your property. I am simply trying to help you avoid the same fate that befell your grandfather. My grandfather rebuilt that ranch from nothing, paid every dollar he owed, died with his honor intact. He died broke. He died free. The words hung in the air. Martin Price's smile faded. Free is not worth much when you cannot pay your bills. Ask your father. He understands the value of financial security over romantic notions of honor. You spoke to my father? I may have mentioned your situation to him. He agrees that selling would be in your best interest. He does not want to see you make the same mistakes his father made. Carter stood. The movement was sudden enough that Martin Price flinched, just slightly. Just enough to show that underneath the power and the polish, he was a man who could be frightened. I am not selling. Not to you, not to anyone. That ranch is going to stay in my family, and it is going to be run the right way, and there is nothing you can do to stop that. Mr. Dalton, you are being foolish. Maybe. But I would rather be a fool who kept his word than a success who sold his soul. He turned and walked toward the door. Frank followed. Behind them, Martin Price called out, "You have until the end of the month to make your payment. If you are even $1 short, I will initiate foreclosure proceedings." And Mr. Dalton, I never lose. Carter stopped at the door but did not turn around. There is always a first time. In the truck driving back toward Montana, Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know he is going to come after you hard now. You embarrassed him, made him look weak. Men like that do not forgive." "I know. You got a plan for making that payment?" "Working on it." They drove in silence for a while. The mountains rose around them, ancient and indifferent to the struggles of men. Carter thought about his grandfather making this same drive, year after year, carrying the weight of debt and determination, refusing to quit even when quitting would have been easier. Sam Dalton had died trying to win. Carter intended to finish what his grandfather had started. The rest of the month was a blur of work and worry. Carter pushed himself harder than he ever had, waking at 3 a.m. to check cattle, working until midnight on marketing and sales. The restaurants were responding, orders were increasing, but the math was still brutal. He needed $140,000 by month's end. He had $128,000 committed. He was $12,000 short. Beth suggested selling more cattle, taking the hit now to make the payment. But Carter knew that would just create a bigger hole later. He needed to build, not deplete. Needed to grow into profitability, not shrink into survival. On the 23rd of the month, with 7 days left, Carter's father called. The conversation was brief and painful. Henry Dalton had indeed spoken with Martin Price, had been told that Carter was struggling, had been encouraged to intervene before his son threw away $1 million opportunity. "Just sell, Carter. Take the money. Start over somewhere else. You do not have to prove anything." "Yes, I do. I have to prove that Granddad was wrong, that you were wrong, that doing things right can actually work. And if you are wrong, if you lose everything like he did, then at least I tried. At least I did not spend the rest of my life wondering what if." Henry was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, older. "You know why I really left ranching? Why I gave up? Because Granddad lost the ranch. Number one, I gave up because I was scared. Scared that if I tried and failed, it would prove I was not man enough to do what he did. It was easier to walk away and pretend I chose a different path than to risk finding out I could not hack it. Dad, I have been a coward for 30 years, Carter. Do not be like me. If you are going to fail, fail trying. That is more than I ever did." The line went dead. Carter sat holding the phone, feeling something shift in his understanding of his father. All these years, he had thought Henry hated ranching because it had destroyed their family. But the real reason was simpler and sadder. Fear, the fear of not measuring up, of trying and failing and proving all your worst thoughts about yourself. Carter had that same fear every day. Every morning when he woke up and saw the numbers that did not add up. But fear was just a feeling. It did not have to be a decision. 2 days before the payment was due, a truck pulled up to the ranch house. Carter did not recognize the vehicle. For a moment, he thought it might be trouble. Bill collectors, bank representatives, Wade Cunningham coming to gloat. Instead, Patricia Moore stepped out. She was older than Carter remembered from the shareholder meeting. Smaller, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been excitement or might have been nervousness. "Mr. Dalton, I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all. What brings you to Montana?" She reached into her truck and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, the kind that held official documents. "I have been doing a lot of thinking since I testified to the FDA about Silver Creek, about my investment there, about what is right and what is profitable. They are not always the same thing." "No, they are not. I sold my shares in Silver Creek, 8% of the operation. Got a fair price even with the investigation pending. And I have been looking for somewhere to invest that money, somewhere that does things the way I wish Silver Creek had done them." She held out the envelope. "This is a cashier's check for $200,000. I would like to buy a 10% stake in Broken Wheel Ranch, if you will have me as a partner." Carter stared at the envelope. $200,000. More than enough to make this month's payment and the next. More than enough to buy breathing room while the direct sales model continued to scale. "Patricia, I cannot guarantee you will make money on this investment. This ranch is barely breaking even." "I know. but you are doing it honestly. And I have learned that honest money sleeps better than dirty money, even if there is less of it. Carter took the envelope with shaking hands. He opened it to verify the amount, and there it was. $200,000 made out to Broken Wheel Ranch. Why are you really doing this? Patricia looked past him toward the mountains, toward the cattle grazing in the distance. Because my grandfather was a rancher, ran a small operation in Nebraska. He was honest and hardworking, and he died broke because men like Wade Cunningham undercut him on price by cheating. I always wish someone had stood up to those men, had proven that integrity could compete. You are doing that, and I want to be part of it. They shook hands. Carter introduced her to Beth and Frank, showed her the operation, explained the business model. By the end of the day, Patricia Moore was officially a 10% partner in Broken Wheel Ranch. That night, Carter sat down and wrote a check to First Montana Bank for $140,000. He put it in an envelope, addressed it to Martin Price, and on the memo line he wrote, Month 4, on time, as promised. The next morning he drove to Billings and hand-delivered it to the bank. Martin Price was not in his office, but Carter left the check with the secretary. He wanted Price to find it, wanted him to understand that Carter Dalton was not going anywhere. On the drive back, his phone rang. It was a number he recognized, Wade Cunningham. Carter almost did not answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But something made him pick up. Wade. The voice on the other end was different than Carter had ever heard it. Hollow, defeated. The FDA finished their investigation. They are fining me $3.2 million. They are suspending my license to operate for 2 years. I am done, Carter. 30 years of building, and it is gone. Carter did not know what to say. He had wanted Wade to face consequences, had wanted justice. But hearing the brokenness in the man's voice, he felt no triumph. Only a deep, complicated sadness. I'm sorry it came to this. Are you? Wade's laugh was bitter. You got what you wanted. You destroyed me. You destroyed yourself. I just told the truth. The truth? Wade was quiet for a long moment. You know what the worst part is? You were right. About the cattle, about the hormones. I knew it was wrong. I knew it would eventually catch up to me. But I kept doing it because it was easy. Because it made money. And now I have lost everything because I was too much of a coward to do things the hard way. It is not too late to make it right. Is not it? I am 60 years old, broke and disgraced. What do I have left to make right? You have time. You have knowledge. You could use it to help instead of hurt. Wade was silent. Then quietly he said, Beth has not spoken to me since she left for Montana. I do not blame her. I drove away the only person who ever really mattered. Tell her I am sorry. For everything. The line went dead. Carter drove the rest of the way in silence, thinking about Wade Cunningham, about how a man could work for 30 years and end up with nothing but regrets, about how success without integrity was just a different kind of failure. He thought about his grandfather, who had died broke but respected, who had kept his word even when keeping it cost him everything. Sam Dalton had lost the battle but won something more important. He had kept his soul. That night, Carter told Beth about the call. She listened without expression, her face unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, He is my father. Part of me will always love him, but another part of me is relieved that he cannot hurt anyone else, relieved that it is finally over. Do you want to talk to him? Not yet. Maybe not ever. Right now, I just want to focus on building something good here, something he could never touch or ruin. They stood on the porch together, watching the sunset behind the mountains. The sky was on fire, orange and red and purple bleeding together, beautiful and temporary and perfect. Month 5 brought new challenges and new victories. A late spring snow killed early grass, forcing Carter to buy supplemental feed he had not budgeted for. One of the tractors finally died completely, requiring a replacement that cost $18,000. A water line broke, flooding a storage shed and ruining 2 months of hay. But month 5 also brought successes that made the setbacks bearable. 3 new restaurants committed to regular orders, including a high-end steakhouse in Denver that wanted 500 pounds per week. A food blogger with 2 million followers visited the ranch and wrote a review that went viral, bringing inquiries from restaurants Carter had never dreamed of reaching. A sustainable agriculture magazine did a feature on Broken Wheel and the honest beef model, and suddenly Carter was fielding calls from ranchers across the country who wanted to know how they could implement similar practices. Revenue hit $153,000. Carter made the payment to the bank with $13,000 to spare. It was the first time he had been ahead instead of behind, and the feeling was better than any drug. Frank found him celebrating quietly in the barn, just sitting on a hay bale with a beer, looking at the cattle. Feels good, does not it? Being ahead. It does, but I know it will not last. Something always breaks. Something always goes wrong. That is ranching. But you know what? Your grandfather used to say that the difference between success and failure is not whether things go wrong. It is whether you keep going when they do. Carter thought about that, thought about all the things that had gone wrong. The betrayal, the accusations, the sabotage, the endless financial pressure. And yet here he was, still standing, still fighting, still believing that doing things right mattered. I am going to make it, Frank. I do not know how yet, but I am going to make it. The old man smiled. I know you will. You got Sam's stubbornness and your daddy's fear, and you learned to use both of them. That is a powerful combination. Powerful. Month 6 arrived with news that changed everything. A letter from First Montana Bank arrived at the ranch, official and serious. Carter opened it expecting another threat from Martin Price. Instead, he found a formal notification that the bank was under federal investigation for discriminatory lending practices. Martin Price had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The letter was signed by an interim bank president Carter had never heard of, a woman named Jennifer Hartwick. It concluded with a single sentence that made him read it 3 times to be sure he understood. All loan terms for Broken Wheel Ranch will be honored under the original agreement with no modifications or additional requirements. Martin Price was gone. The threat was neutralized. The path was clear. Carter called Rebecca Chen, the lawyer who had first brought him the inheritance news. He wanted to make sure he understood what this meant. It means you won, she said simply. Price was using his position to pressure ranchers into selling to his development partners. The FBI has been watching him for months. Your complaint about your grandfather's loan history triggered a broader investigation. They found evidence of decades of corruption. So I just have to make the payments for another 12 months? That is all. Keep doing what you are doing. Stay profitable. And in 12 months, the ranch is yours free and clear. After he hung up, Carter walked out to the north pasture where his grandfather had been buried. Sam had not wanted a cemetery, had asked to be laid to rest on the land he loved, under a simple stone that read, Sam Dalton. Kept his word. Carter stood at the grave and told his grandfather everything. About Patricia's investment, about Wade's downfall, about Martin Price's investigation, about the ranch turning profitable, about Beth, about the future that was finally starting to look possible. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and clean Montana air. In the distance, the mountains stood like sentinels, permanent and patient. Carter felt his grandfather's presence, not as a ghost, but as a legacy, as lessons learned and wisdom passed down, as the stubborn refusal to quit that ran in the Dalton blood. I am going to finish what you started, Granddad. I am going to prove you right. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in the endless sky. Carter watched it for a long time, feeling something settle in his chest, not peace exactly, but purpose, direction, the knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. He turned and walked back toward the ranch house, where Beth was waiting with coffee and plans for tomorrow, where Frank was probably already working, even though the sun was barely up, where good men were doing honest work on land that had been fought for and bled for and loved. The war was not over. There were still 12 months to go, 12 more payments to make, 12 more months of waking up before dawn and working until his body ached and his mind went numb. 12 more months of wondering if he would make it. But Carter knew now that he could handle it, that he had what it took, because he was Sam Dalton's grandson, and Daltons did not quit. He made the 6th-month payment with room to spare, then the 7th, the 8th. Each month, the revenue grew a little more. Each month, the operation became a little more efficient. Each month, the dream his grandfather had died protecting became a little more real. By month 9, Carter had expanded the crew to 8 full-time hands. By month 10, he had added 1,000 acres through a lease agreement with a neighbor. By month 11, honest beef was being served in 42 restaurants across 9 states. And in month 12, something unexpected happened. A group of 5 small ranchers approached Carter with a proposal. They had been watching what he was doing, had seen the success of the ethical approach, and they wanted to form a cooperative, pool their resources, share processing costs, market together under a unified brand that stood for something more than just cheap beef. Carter spent a week thinking about it, talked it over with Beth and Frank and Patricia. In the end, he said yes, because this was bigger than just one ranch. This was about changing an industry, about proving that the right way could be the profitable way, about creating something that would outlast them all. The cooperative launched in month 13. 6 ranches, 22,000 acres combined, 2,000 head of cattle raised to the highest standards, a processing partnership that gave them control over quality, a marketing platform that told their story to people who cared. And suddenly, Carter was not just saving his grandfather's ranch, he was building a movement. The payments continued. Month 14, month 15, month 16, Carter stopped worrying about whether he would make them, started focusing on how much he could grow beyond them, started thinking about what came next after the debt was paid, after the ranch was his. In month 17, Wade Cunningham called again. His voice was different this time, steadier, more like the man Carter remembered from before everything went wrong. I wanted you to know, the FDA offered me a consulting position. They want me to help write new regulations, use my knowledge of how the industry cuts corners to help close the loopholes. That is good, Wade. That is really good. It is not redemption, I know that. But it is something, a chance to do some good with the years I have left. Beth would want to know. She would be proud. Wade was quiet. Then, tell her I am trying. Tell her I am finally trying to be the man she deserved to have as a father. I will. After he hung up, Carter told Beth. She listened with tears in her eyes. Maybe someday, she said. Maybe someday I will be ready to talk to him. But not yet. That is okay. You will know when it is time. Month 18 dawned clear and cold. The kind of Montana morning that made you grateful to be alive. Carter woke before the alarm, unable to sleep. Today was the day, the last payment, the end of the debt, the beginning of true ownership. He stood at the kitchen window with coffee, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. 18 months, 547 days, every one of them earned, every one of them bringing him closer to this moment. Beth found him there and wrapped her arms around him. Ready? More than ready. They drove to Billings together. The route was so familiar now that Carter could have done it blind. Every curve, every landmark, every mile marker that counted down the distance between debt and freedom. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Carter arrived 15 minutes early, the final check in his pocket. $140,000. The last time he would ever make this payment. The last time he would owe First Montana Bank anything. Jennifer Hartwick greeted them personally. She had taken over as permanent president after Martin Price's removal, and in the 6 months since, she had transformed the bank's culture. No more predatory lending, no more targeting vulnerable ranchers, just honest banking for honest people. She led them to the conference room, spread documents across the table, and smiled. Mr. Dalton, congratulations. You have made every payment on time. You have exceeded every projection. By any measure, you have fulfilled your obligations. The ranch is yours. Carter handed her the check, watched her process it, watched her stamp it paid, watched her slide the deed across the table, free and clear of any encumbrance. It is done. Carter picked up the deed, held it in his hands, felt the weight of 2 generations of fighting, 2 generations of refusing to quit, 2 generations of believing that doing right mattered. Thank you. You earned it. Your grandfather would be proud. They shook hands, signed the final papers. And then Carter walked out of First Montana Bank for the last time, carrying the deed to Broken Wheel Ranch. Unburdened, free, victorious. In the truck, Beth took his hand. How does it feel? Like I can finally breathe. The ranch was theirs, free and clear. Carter stood at the kitchen window the morning after the final payment, watching the sun rise over the land that belonged to him now without conditions or obligations. No debt, no deadlines, no bank breathing down his neck. Just 14,000 acres of Montana and the future he would build on it. Beth found him there, same as she had so many mornings before. But this time, when she wrapped her arms around him, the tension that had lived in his shoulders for 18 months was gone. He felt lighter, younger, like a man who had been carrying a boulder uphill and had finally reached the summit. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. How strange it feels not to be counting dollars and days. Get used to it. You earned this. They had coffee on the porch as the ranch woke up around them. Miguel was already moving cattle. Kyle was checking fence lines. Thomas was working on the tractor that never quite ran right, but always ran well enough. The rhythm of the work had not changed. Only Carter's relationship to it had changed. Before, he had been working to survive. Now he was working to build. Frank emerged from the bunkhouse, moving slower than he used to, but still steady. The old man had turned 70 last month, though he refused to acknowledge it. Age was just a number, he said. Work was what kept you young. He climbed the porch steps and accepted the coffee Beth offered. Sleep well? Like a man with no debts. Frank smiled. Your grandfather used to say the same thing. The few times he managed to get ahead of the bills, anyway. They sat in comfortable silence. Three people who had fought the same fight and won. The morning was cool, the kind of Montana morning that reminded you why people stayed here despite the harsh winters and the hard work. There was a purity to it, a cleanness in the air that you could not find anywhere else. What happens now? Frank asked. You got the ranch, you got the business growing. What is next? Carter had been thinking about that question for weeks. He had spent 18 months focused on a single goal. Make the payments. Save the ranch. Prove his grandfather right. Now that he had achieved it, the future stretched out before him like an unmarked trail. Possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. I want to expand the cooperative, bring in more ranchers, build something that outlasts us. Frank nodded slowly. Your grandfather would like that. He always said ranching was not about one man or one ranch. It was about a way of life, about keeping something good alive. The cooperative had grown to 8 ranches now, with 3 more in the process of joining. Together, they controlled 32,000 acres and 3,000 head of cattle. They had negotiated better rates with processors, secured contracts with 75 restaurants, and built a brand that meant something. Honest beef, raised right, sold fair. But Carter wanted more, wanted to create a model that other regions could replicate, wanted to prove that ethical ranching was not just viable but superior, that doing things right was not a liability but a competitive advantage. Over the next few months, Carter threw himself into building what his grandfather had dreamed of. He traveled to conferences and spoke to audiences of skeptical ranchers who had spent their lives cutting corners and chasing short-term profits. He told them about Sam Dalton, about a man who lost everything and spent 30 years getting it back, about integrity as strategy, not just morality. Some of them listened, some of them laughed, but a few, a precious few, came up to him afterward with hope in their eyes and said, how do I start? How do I change? How do I convince my family that there is a better way? And Carter would tell them about the cooperative, about shared resources and collective marketing, about building trust with consumers who were hungry for authenticity, about the long game versus the quick buck. He became a teacher without meaning to, a leader without seeking it, the young rancher who saved his grandfather's ranch through stubbornness and integrity, the man who proved that honest could win. But success brought its own complications. 6 months after making the final payment, Carter received a call from a venture capital firm in San Francisco. They had been following the Honest Beef story. They saw potential. They wanted to invest $10 million to scale the cooperative into a national brand. The offer was staggering. $10 million would let them expand into processing facilities, build their own distribution network, market to consumers across the country. They could go from 8 ranches to 80, from 3,000 head to 30,000. Carter called a meeting of the cooperative members. 8 ranchers sitting around a table in the Broken Wheel Ranch House, drinking coffee and considering an offer that could transform all their lives. Some of them were excited. The younger ranchers saw opportunity, saw a chance to build something massive, something that could change an industry. But others were skeptical. The older ranchers, the ones who had seen too many deals that sounded good and turned sour, worried about losing control, about venture capitalists who did not understand ranching trying to impose their vision. Frank was the one who asked the question that mattered. What would your grandfather say? Carter thought about Sam Dalton, about a man who refused outside money even when it would have saved him, who valued independence over expansion, who died owing money to a bank but owning his choices. He would say, be careful who you partner with. Money always comes with strings. And what do you say? Carter looked around the table at men and women who had trusted him, who had joined the cooperative because they believed in the vision, who had bet their futures on the idea that integrity mattered. I say we do not need venture capital. We grow at our own pace. We stay independent. We build something that is ours, not theirs. The vote was unanimous. They turned down the $10 million, and in doing so, they stayed true to what made them different in the first place. Word of the decision spread through the industry. Some people thought Carter was a fool. $10 million was not the kind of money you walked away from. But others understood, saw it as proof that the cooperative was not just another business play, that the values were real. Applications to join the cooperative doubled. Ranchers who had been watching from the sidelines decided that if Carter was willing to turn down that kind of money to preserve independence, maybe this really was different. Maybe this really was worth believing in. By the end of the first year of true ownership, the cooperative had grown to 15 ranches, 48,000 acres, 5,000 head of cattle, 120 restaurants across 12 states, annual revenue approaching $8 million, distributed fairly among members based on production and quality. And through it all, Broken Wheel remained the anchor, the original, the ranch that Sam Dalton had died fighting for and Carter Dalton had lived to save. Beth's veterinary practice had grown alongside the ranch. She now employed 2 other vets and served not just the cooperative, but dozens of ranches across Montana. She had become known as the vet who would not compromise, who insisted on proper animal welfare, even when it was expensive or inconvenient. Ranchers respected that, trusted it, and slowly, carefully, Beth had begun talking to her father again. It started with emails, short, formal, Wade updating her on his work with the FDA, Beth responding with brief acknowledgments. No forgiveness, no reconciliation, just communication. The slow, painful process of 2 people trying to find their way back to something that resembled a relationship. Wade had changed. Prison time for the FDA violations had broken something in him. But what emerged from the brokenness was something quieter, more honest. He worked as a consultant now, helping to close the loopholes he had once exploited, turning his knowledge of corruption into expertise in prevention. He called Beth once a month, short conversations, awkward, but real in a way their relationship had never been before. He did not ask for forgiveness, did not make excuses, just tried slowly to be present in her life without demanding anything in return. Carter never spoke to him directly, did not need to. Wade Cunningham had been defeated and humbled and changed. That was enough. The man who had tried to destroy him had ended up destroying himself, and in that destruction had found a kind of redemption. It was not the ending Carter would have written, but it was the ending that felt most true, most human. People were complicated. Villains could become teachers. Enemies could become cautionary tales that helped others avoid the same mistakes. One afternoon in late fall, Carter received a call that he had been half expecting for months. It was from a lawyer representing the liquidation of Silver Creek Ranch assets. Wade's operation had been sold to cover the FDA fines and legal fees. The new owners were a group of investors who planned to convert it into a corporate farming operation. Carter listened to the offer. They wanted to know if he was interested in buying the equipment, the tractors, the cattle handling systems, the infrastructure that Wade had built over 30 years. For a moment, Carter considered it. Considered owning a piece of the place that had once owned him. But then he thought about what it would mean, about keeping alive the tools of an operation that had represented everything wrong with modern ranching. I am not interested, but I know some people who might be. He called a meeting of young ranchers he had been mentoring, told them about the Silver Creek equipment, helped them pool their resources to buy it at auction, and within 6 months, those same young ranchers had formed their own cooperative, using the tools from Wade's empire to build something ethical, something sustainable. Silver Creek Ranch, once a symbol of cutting corners and chasing profits, became the foundation for a new generation of honest ranchers. Wade's legacy, rebuilt by people who learned from his mistakes. Carter thought his grandfather would have appreciated the irony. 2 years after making the final payment, Henry Dalton moved to Montana permanently. He sold his house in Wyoming, quit his insurance job, and showed up at Broken Wheel with a truck full of belongings and a tentative smile. I thought you might need someone to handle the business side. Contracts, negotiations, risk management, leave you free to focus on the cattle. Carter looked at his father, at a man who had spent 30 years running from his fear and had finally found the courage to face it, at a man who wanted a second chance to be part of something that mattered. We could use that. But Dad, this is hard work. Long hours. No guarantee of success. Henry smiled. Sounds like every day of your grandfather's life. About time I understood what that was like. They shook hands, father and son, two generations of Daltons, finally on the same side. Henry proved to be invaluable. His business acumen, developed over decades in the insurance industry, helped Carter navigate contracts and negotiations with a sophistication the young rancher had lacked. He understood risk in ways that ranchers typically did not, understood how to structure deals that protected the cooperative while allowing for growth. More than that, he brought something Carter had not expected: pride. For the first time in Carter's memory, Henry Dalton was proud of the work he was doing, proud to be part of something that honored his father's memory, proud to have a role in finishing what Sam had started. They worked side by side, father and son, building something neither could have built alone. And in the process, they healed wounds that had been festering for decades. Wounds that went back to a 19-year-old Henry watching his father lose everything. Wounds that came from shame and fear and misunderstanding. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day of work, Henry said something that Carter had been waiting his whole life to hear. "I was wrong about your grandfather, wrong about this life, wrong about what matters. He was not a failure. He was the bravest man I ever knew." Carter felt tears sting his eyes. "Thanks, Dad. Thank you for giving me a chance to be part of this, for letting me help finish what he started." They sat in silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The same mountains that had watched Sam Dalton fight and lose and fight again. The same mountains that would watch future generations of Daltons carry on the work. 3 years after taking ownership, Carter stood on a stage at the National Cattlemen's Association conference and told his story to an audience of 2,000 ranchers. He talked about honest beef and direct marketing and building trust with consumers. He talked about cooperative models and ethical practices and long-term thinking. But mostly he talked about his grandfather, about Sam Dalton, who had refused to quit, who had shown that losing a battle did not mean losing the war, who had left behind more than land and cattle, who had left behind an example. When he finished, the applause was long and loud. Ranchers who had spent their lives doing things the conventional way stood and clapped for a different approach. Some of them would never change, but some of them would, and that was enough. After the speech, a young woman approached, maybe 25, with dirt under her fingernails and determination in her eyes. "Mr. Dalton, my family's ranch is failing. We have been doing things the way everyone else does, and it is killing us. How do I convince my father to try something different?" Carter thought about his own father, about Henry Dalton, who now managed Broken Wheel's business operations, and smiled more than he had in 30 years. About redemption and second chances and the courage to admit you were wrong. You show him it works. You prove that the right way can be the profitable way, and you give him time. Change is scary, especially for people who have been doing things the same way their whole lives. But eventually, if you are patient and persistent, they come around. The young woman nodded, encouraged. "Your grandfather's story gives me hope." It should, because it is not just his story, it is all of our stories. Everyone who refuses to quit, everyone who believes that integrity matters, everyone who is willing to do the hard work of building something that lasts. That night, Carter called Beth from his hotel room. She was back at the ranch, managing a difficult calving season. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, but also the satisfaction, the deep contentment that came from doing work that mattered. "How did it go?" "I think we reached some people. Planted some seeds." "Good. The world needs more ranchers like you, like us. I could not do this without you." "I know," she laughed. "When are you coming home?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Then I am yours for 2 weeks. No travel, no conferences, just ranch work and quiet evenings." "Sounds perfect." 5 years after inheriting Broken Wheel Ranch, Carter sat at his grandfather's desk and wrote a letter. Not to Sam, who was beyond letters now, but to the grandchild or great-grandchild who might someday sit in the same chair, facing their own impossible challenges. He wrote about the betrayal and the debt, about 18 months of working until his body broke and his mind screamed, about the allies who appeared when he needed them most, about the importance of doing things right even when doing things wrong would be easier. He wrote about Sam Dalton, who lost everything and spent 30 years getting it back, about Henry Dalton, who ran from fear and finally found courage, about himself, a man who had been fired and accused and broken, but who refused to stay down. And he wrote about the land, about 14,000 acres of Montana that had been fought for and bled for and loved, about how the land remembered, about how a person's work outlasted their body, about how integrity was not just a value but a strategy. He sealed the letter and placed it in the safe with the deed and Sam's original letters and all the evidence of the Dalton family's long fight for this place. Someday, someone would need it, would need to know that their struggle was not new, that others had fought and won, that the hard way was the only way that lasted. 10 years after taking ownership, Carter and Beth stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched their son, Samuel, ride his first horse. The boy was fearless, laughing as the gentle mare walked him around the corral. Beth held their daughter, Catherine, who was 2 and already showing signs of the same stubborn determination that ran in the Dalton blood. Frank sat in his rocking chair, older now, moving slowly but still present, still the keeper of knowledge, still the link to Sam Dalton and the old ways that were worth preserving. He is a natural, Frank said, watching Samuel. Got his great-grandfather's seat. Carter felt something settle in his chest, a completeness he had not known he was missing. 3 generations removed, and Sam Dalton's legacy was still shaping lives, still teaching lessons, still proving that the hard way mattered. The cooperative had grown to 30 ranches now, 90,000 acres, 12,000 head of cattle, 300 restaurants, 20 million in annual revenue. They had built processing facilities, distribution networks, a brand that consumers trusted. But more than that, they had changed the conversation, had proven that ethical ranching was not just possible but profitable, had shown that doing things right could win. Other regions were forming their own cooperatives, using the broken wheel model. The movement Sam Dalton had died trying to start was finally spreading. Wade Cunningham had passed away 2 years earlier. Heart attack, quick and painless. Beth had attended the funeral, standing in the back, not quite ready to forgive, but no longer carrying the anger. Wade had left everything to a scholarship fund for young ranchers, his final attempt to make amends for the damage he had done. Martin Price was still in prison, would be for another 5 years. The development company he had partnered with had collapsed after his conviction. The lithium deposit on Broken Wheel land sat untouched, and Carter intended to keep it that way. Some things were worth more than money. That evening, after the children were asleep, Carter walked out to his grandfather's grave. The stone had weathered over the years, the letters worn by wind and snow, but still readable. Sam Dalton kept his word. He sat on the ground and talked to the man who had made all of this possible. We did it, Granddad. We proved them all wrong, proved that integrity wins, that the hard way is the only way that lasts. You died trying to finish the fight, and I got to see it through, got to build on what you started, got to prove you were right. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and grass and cattle, the sounds of the land, the sounds that had put Sam Dalton to sleep for 30 years and would put Carter to sleep for however many years he had left. He pulled out the letter Sam had written him. Read it one more time in the fading light. Do not let history repeat. History had not repeated. Carter had not lost the ranch the way Sam had, but more than that, he had won it in a way his grandfather never imagined. Not through 30 years of grinding poverty, not through dying before seeing victory, but through building alliances, through creating systems, through proving that ethical ranching could be profitable ranching. He had finished Sam's fight, but he had fought it his own way, and that was exactly as it should be. Each generation taking the lessons of the last and building something new, something better. Carter stood and brushed off his jeans, looked one last time at the stone that marked where his grandfather rested, where the man who had taught him everything without ever meeting him lay beneath Montana soil. Thank you, he whispered, for believing in me before I believed in myself, for leaving me a second chance, for showing me that losing a battle does not mean losing the war. He walked back toward the ranch house, where lights glowed warm against the gathering darkness, where his wife and children waited, where his father and Frank sat on the porch, probably arguing about the best way to rotate pastures, where home was. 15 years after inheriting Broken Wheel Ranch, Carter Dalton stood as a completely different man than the one who had been fired from Silver Creek. He was 47 now, gray showing in his hair, lines around his eyes from years of squinting at Montana sun, hands scarred and calloused from work that never ended. But he was content, deeply, profoundly content. He had taken his grandfather's broken dream and made it whole, had taken his father's shame and turned it to pride, had taken his own anger and transformed it into purpose. The ranch was more than just land now. It was a legacy, a proving ground. Evidence that integrity was not just noble but necessary, that the shortcuts always caught up to you eventually, that the hard way was the only way worth taking. Samuel was 12 now, working cattle alongside his father, learning the lessons that Sam had taught Carter through letters and legacy, learning that a person's word mattered, that promises kept were the foundation of everything good, that land remembered and work outlasted the worker. Carter watched his son working and saw 4 generations, saw Sam's determination, saw Henry's intelligence, saw his own stubbornness, saw something new too, something that belonged to Samuel alone, the best of all of them, distilled and passed forward. One evening, Samuel asked the question that Carter had been waiting for. "Dad, why did great-grandpa Sam keep fighting when he knew he might not win?" Carter thought about how to answer, about how to explain the stubborn refusal to quit that ran in their blood, about how to make a 12-year-old understand that some things mattered more than winning or losing. Because giving up would have meant they were right, the people who cheated him, the people who said honest men could not compete. If he had given up, they would have won. Not just the ranch, but the argument, and he could not let that happen. But he died before he got it all back. He did. But he died knowing he had fought the right way, and he left behind enough for me to finish what he started. That is a kind of winning too. Samuel thought about that. Then quietly, "Are you going to leave this ranch to me someday?" Carter looked at his son, at the boy who would become a man, who would face his own challenges, who would have to decide what kind of rancher he wanted to be. That depends on you, if you want it, if you are willing to do the work, if you believe in what it stands for. This ranch is not just land and cattle, it is a promise to do things right, even when doing things wrong would be easier. Can you make that promise? Samuel met his father's eyes. "I can." "Then yes, someday this will be yours." They shook hands. Father and son, another generation joining the fight, another link in the chain that stretched back to Sam Dalton and forward to children not yet born. That night, Carter added a new page to the letter he had written years ago, a postscript for Samuel and Catherine and whoever came after them. "You will face challenges I cannot imagine. The world will change in ways I cannot predict. But some things do not change. Integrity matters. Your word matters. The land matters. Keep these truths and you will find your way through whatever comes. Do not let history repeat, but do not forget it either. Learn from it, build on it, make it better. And remember, you are a Dalton. We do not quit." He sealed the letter and placed it back in the safe. His part of the story was nearly written. The ending was not yet clear, but the arc was: fired to redeemed, broken to rebuilt, lost to found. 20 years after inheriting Broken Wheel Ranch, Carter Dalton sat on the porch with Frank Torres and watched the sun set behind the mountains. Frank was 88 now, bent and slow, but still sharp, still present. The old man had been there for every step of the journey, had taught Carter everything he knew about ranching and much of what he knew about life, had been a link to Sam Dalton when no other link existed, had been mentor and friend, and the closest thing to a grandfather Carter had ever really known. "You did good," Frank said. "Better than good. Sam would be proud." "We did good. I could not have done it without you." Frank smiled. "I am just the hired help. You did the hard part. You stayed when you could have left. You believed when you could have doubted. That is not hired help. That is family." They sat in comfortable silence. Two men who had fought the same fight and won, who had built something that would outlast them both, who understood that the work was never finished, but could still celebrate how far they had come. Frank passed away peaceful in his sleep 3 months later. They buried him next to Sam Dalton under a stone that read, "Frank Torres kept the faith." At the funeral, ranchers came from across the state, young and old, members of the cooperative and competitors, who respected what Broken Wheel represented. They told stories of Frank's wisdom, his patience, his unwavering commitment to doing things right. Carter gave the eulogy, talked about a man who had spent 42 years on one ranch, who had seen Sam Dalton lose everything and rebuild, who had stayed to teach the next generation, who had proven that loyalty and integrity were not old-fashioned values but timeless ones. When he finished, he placed a bottle of whiskey on Frank's grave, the old man's favorite brand, the same ritual he performed at Sam's grave every year. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The ranch continued without Frank, but it was not the same, could never be the same. But that was the way of things. Generations turned, Old hands were replaced by new ones. The work continued, but the workers changed. Carter was 50 now, old enough to understand mortality, old enough to think about his own legacy, old enough to wonder what he wanted to be remembered for. He thought about Sam, who wanted to be remembered for keeping his word. He thought about Frank, who wanted to be remembered for keeping the faith. He thought about what he wanted his own stone to say when the time came. Carter Dalton, build on what came before. That felt right. He had not started the fight, had not even chosen it really, but he had finished it, had taken the foundation his grandfather laid and built something his grandfather could only dream of, had proven that the next generation could learn from the last without repeating their mistakes. That was legacy, not just passing down land, passing down lessons, passing down the will to keep fighting even when the fight seemed impossible. 25 years after inheriting Broken Wheel Ranch, Carter stood before the Montana State Legislature and testified in favor of new regulations that would require transparency in livestock treatment. The regulations would make it harder to cut corners, would level the playing field for ranchers who did things right. The industry lobbyists fought back hard, said the regulations would drive up costs, would hurt small operators, would make Montana beef less competitive. Carter listened to their arguments and smiled, because he had heard it all before, had heard that doing things right was too expensive, that consumers did not care, that the market rewarded efficiency, not ethics. And he had proven them all wrong. The regulations passed, not by much, but enough. And Carter knew that somewhere Sam Dalton was smiling. The fight his grandfather had lost in his generation had been won in his grandson's. That evening, Carter drove back to Broken Wheel. The route was so familiar now that he barely had to think. Just hands on wheel, eyes on road, mind free to wander. He thought about the boy he had been at 32, angry, broken, convinced the world rewarded cheaters and punished honest men. He thought about how wrong he had been, how much he had learned, how far he had come. The world did not reward honest men automatically, but it did not punish them either. It was neutral, indifferent. And in that indifference was opportunity, the opportunity to prove that integrity worked, that the hard way paid off, that doing right mattered. You just had to be willing to fight for it, to work for it, to bleed for it. And Carter had been willing, was still willing, would always be willing, because he was Sam Dalton's grandson, and Daltons did not quit. He pulled through the gates of Broken Wheel Ranch as the sun was setting, saw his children working in the barn, saw his grandchildren playing in the yard, saw Beth waiting on the porch with coffee and a smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. He climbed out of the truck and stood for a moment, just looking. At the ranch his grandfather had died protecting, at the family he had built, at the legacy that would continue long after he was gone. This was what winning looked like. Not perfection, not ease, just honest work and good people and land that would remember long after they were all dust. Carter Dalton walked up the porch steps and took the coffee Beth offered, kissed her forehead, sat in the rocking chair that had been his grandfather's, then Frank's, now his. And he rocked slowly, watching the last light fade from the Montana sky, knowing that when morning came, the work would begin again. The same work his grandfather had done, the same work his children would do, the same work that connected them all across time and struggle and stubborn refusal to quit. The land remembered, the work outlasted the worker, and the legacy of Sam Dalton, honest rancher, lived on as long as there was a Broken Wheel Ranch in Montana, as long as there were Daltons who kept their word, as long as there were people who believed that doing right was worth the fight. The story was finished, but the work would never end. And that was exactly how it should be.